My name is Christian Bernert from the Chodong Karmo Translation Group. I'm based at the International Buddhist Academy in Kathmandu, Nepal. The book I translated is from Rongtönpa, or Rongtönpa Kunrik, was born in the late or second half of the 14th century and was originally from a Bömpo family but became a very influential teacher in the Sakya tradition. And it said that he was not only influential for the Sakya tradition, but that in fact most scholastic lineages that eventually came to the Kagyu and Nyingma schools also came through Rongtön. So it's one can hardly underestimate the importance of this particular teacher, because he influenced so much of all the studies that the Sakya, the Kagyu and the Nyingma schools later did, and all the systems that developed out of these, the commentaries that he wrote and the teachings that he gave to his many students from all traditions. So that was his big contribution to the history of Tibetan scholasticism. He was also very famous for founding a monastic institution called the Nalendra monastery in Pempo in central Tibet. Yeah, from among all the commentaries Rongtön wrote, and he wrote many, I think about 40 commentaries on the big Indian Shastras. He was particularly renowned for his commentaries on the Maitreya texts, and that's why in the tradition also he's renowned as an emanation of the future Buddha Maitreya. His main text that he commented on was the Abhisamaya Lankara and the commentaries on that, the Clear Ornament of Realization. And but he also commented on the other texts of Maitreya, and one of these was the Madhyanta Vibhaga, or distinguishing the middle from the extremes. And that is the book I translated, and with Chodong Karmo, and that was published by Shambhala. So now the question why this text is relevant is, of course, in the broader picture of Buddhist studies and practice. This distinction that is sometimes made between the practitioners and the scholars is actually one that is ideally integrated into the same person. And we can see that in the great masters of the previous generations and of our times, like Khenchen Ape Rinpoche, for example. And so it's really a distinction that's probably more based on personal preferences and dispositions. But to know precisely what the practice and the path is about gives a lot of confidence. So particularly for one's own practice, one understands what are the stages that will help one eliminate the obstacles in the mind and whatever prevents awakening. And if one is to teach others, of course, that has to be understood in great detail, because one has to communicate that to others. So this project of awakening is something that's, of course, very complex, not because of the nature of this awakening, but because of the mind and the complexities of our own mind and habitual emotional patterns, mental patterns. So, and that's why the path can be very complex and complicated. And for this reason, in order to understand the path well, the studies are very important. And to understand the processes that are forming our habitual patterns, that are driving everything we do, our thoughts, our words, our actions, and to understand how to untangle and liberate all these patterns and tendencies. So for that, the study of the path, which gives like a very clear map of the whole process, is very helpful and important. Now in this text in particular, which stands in the Yogacara tradition, which is one of the big schools of Indian Buddhist thought, Rongtön comments on this text really from its own perspective. So it doesn't create a hierarchy which is sometimes made, where one school is viewed as superior to the other, but he really comments on this text from its own perspectives and gives a very clear presentation. And it has basically 5 chapters, which begins with the characteristics, which is basically the presentation of the worldview according to the Yogacara system. And then it explains the veils that prevent the individual from attaining liberation, then reality, which must be recognized to achieve liberation, the antidotes or the practices which are used in order to remove these veils, and then all the other practices that support the path, which is called the unsurpassed vehicle. So by understanding what in the first chapter, what is the general worldview that is presented according to the Yogacara view, Rongtön and the author, of course, Maitreya, really set the foundation, how to understand our existence. And this is so fundamental because everything one always does is rooted in our understanding of the world, on our worldview. So to set this, to correct this wrong understanding of our experience of the world, this first chapter is explaining the characteristics of samsara and nirvana through the Yogacara perspective. And then all of this is again done from the Yogacara perspective, everything that has to be removed from our experience, from the mind, all the veils or the obscuration, afflictions and so on. All of that is, again, has to be understood so that the path and the practice one engages in is not something like a blank or a dark territory, but is something that these texts, these treatises really shine a light upon. So then the road is clear and you know what you have to do, what you have to recognize, what you have to remove, and what are the practices that are used to remove that. So that is the purpose. And one thing that is very important for Rongtön is to make these complex texts accessible for practitioners, precisely. So what he did, on top of writing his long commentaries, Rongtön composed very short pith instructions. So there's a number of about 40 texts. Some of them are of tantric nature, so for my purposes now in this context, I don't look at them. But a lot of them are on the sutras, or sutra level of teachings, and many of them are on the shastras, on these long philosophical treatises. So one of these texts is precisely the Madhyanta Vibhaga, the distinguishing the middle from the extremes. And in there, he very briefly explains why these 5 chapters are taught, more or less what I just explained, and he does that for many other texts. And this whole collection of short pith instructions and meditation manuals is the object of my next project for Chodron Karmo, which is the translations of these short meditation manuals.